With Britain's exit from the European Union looming, fascist right-wing groups are on the rise. What is the impact of Brexit for British Asian minority ethnic communities, and what is the future of the UK as a unified nation? Today we are talking about economic uncertainties, hate crime and Brexit. I'm Olivia Russell, and here we have Barry Sheerman with me today, Labour and Cooperative MP for Huddersfield. So Barry, for people who aren't aware, please could you just tell me a little bit about your role in Huddersfield and what you do as an MP?
Well, I'm the Member of Parliament for Huddersfield. I have been for a very long time. I'm a very experienced parliamentarian. I still pride myself on being one of the most active MPs in Parliament. I'm usually in the top 10 or 20 MPs in terms of participation in debates, asking questions, and just doing the job professionally. I go down to London every week to make sure the voice of Huddersfield is heard loud and clear. And that means the whole community of Huddersfield. And some people sometimes, make that mistake. Well, I'm not a Labour voter or Labour and Cooperative voter, Barry. So do you take any notice of me? Once I'm elected, I represent the whole of the constituency. I don't care who voted for me, who didn't. My job is trying to help them and to make sure their voice is heard. So, I think that's very important. People should remember that once you're elected, your responsibility is for the whole of the town, whole of the constituency.
Okay, and for you as an individual and as an MP, what does Brexit represent for you?
I get elected to go down to Parliament to try and make sure that the people in Huddersfield are safe, secure, prosperous, and they have a good future, not just in the short term, but for their children and grandchildren. I want prosperous people, prosperous towns. I want the good life for my constituents. And what really frightens the life out of me is that going out of the European Union, I fought the campaign very hard indeed. And as you know, Huddersfield, just by a small margin, voted to remain, as did Colne Valley. Not the whole of Kirklees, because even Kirklees wide, the local authority, local council area, which includes Batley and Spen and Dewsbury, even overall, that was still only the national average of 52-48. So, I represent a constituency that voted Remain, only by a small margin, and I also represent those people that voted Leave. Yes. And what I really worry about is all the research now, all this time over that we've been able to look at the real economic implications means that every one of us in Huddersfield will be worse off outside of Europe. Not a little bit, a lot worse. And our manufacturing, our service industries, all of our jobs will be affected in Huddersfield. I didn't get elected for that. And this is why I've been fighting the Brexit, but also, the worst kind of Brexit. And I really worry that the present Prime Minister would crash out of Europe with no deal, even with the implications for people's living standards, and I'm not going to allow him.
So as you know, it seems as though the provisions proposed in the EU bill, they don't have much employability rights, protection rights regarding that. So in the north of England in particular, there's a lot of textile industry, agriculture, and BAME groups do work in these sort of industries, especially Pakistani, Bengali, people of that descent. So I'm just wondering, why is it important to help these individuals and reskill them in this type of work? Because obviously it's such an uncertain time when it comes to economic prosperity, future jobs, this sort of thing. So why is it important maybe to implement a programme to reskill these workers in a different trade?
I think you're right in one sense, but could I say that if you look at the whole of the United Kingdom, it's just like people say it's the north of England. Manufacturing is still alive and well all over the UK. And Huddersfield is almost the average town in Britain. 10.5% of people in Britain make things. They're in manufacturing. That's spread all over the country. It's still very low in London and the south. It's down to about 5%. But all over our country, people are making things and exporting them. And they're really highly skilled and highly trained people. And certainly here in Huddersfield, our manufacturing, is a top end of textiles, top end of manufacturing. It really is an amazing kind of town. But I have to say that all those jobs will be affected by everyone. Whatever their ethnic background, they're all going to be affected by the fact that the present deal undermines rights at work, undermines environmental standards, and undermines the consumer standards. So, we're looking at the whole human being here, wherever they're from, are going to be badly affected. And you're quite right in saying that in Huddersfield, for example, quite a high percentage of people came to this country originally to work in textiles. And you'll see them still working, and many of them gone on to get degrees and higher qualifications and all the rest. But the original core of migration post-1945 into Britain was very largely into our manufacturing sector. And some of the very best people we have in management are now senior managers in manufacturing. So manufacturing matters to our diverse community in Huddersfield.
In terms of these people, though, that are reliant on this livelihood, and obviously because a lot of exports in that industry do go out to the EU, do you think personally that there should be some sort of programme in place or implemented to reskill these workers? Something in place whereby government funds it for individual constituencies, i.e. Huddersfield, because like I was saying to you just then, in regards to textile and agriculture, it is very prominent up here. Yes, it is around the country as well, I'm not denying that as such, but do you think there should be something in place to help these workers be skilled in different trades, in different working backgrounds, because a lot of them are very much grass-rooted and stuck down to one career throughout their whole lives. And obviously because of this economic uncertainty in the UK as of now, we've just taken a completely different political discourse. So I'm saying to you, do you think there should be a plan in place for people of Huddersfield, like a meeting group or something, so where they can go, learn new skills, meet different people, and just kind of prepare for what is to come with Brexit?
I think that's a very good point. I think the more groups, I started with a whole group of manufacturers and employers some time ago, a really very good called the Huddersfield Enterprise Foundation. And that was exactly meeting your challenge. And I think the idea that you've given me today is a good one, that we revive that but expand it. In the past, that was really for people from all backgrounds who were young enterprises or older enterprises who wanted to start their own business. And we identified, even in 1 year, 55 new businesses, and we've 55 new entrepreneurs of all ages. And I think you're right. Bringing that group back, of employers, people that will be effective, their employment rates and their employment rights, I think that's a very good idea. And in fact, I'm meeting the trade unions later on today, representative of the trade union movement, to see if we can get that going.
And I'd say that in regards to BAME and Brexit, the BNP, they saw their downfall probably in 2009, 2010 sort of time. But I feel like post-Brexit, post the 2016 referendum, there certainly has a normalisation of far-right politics that have been endorsed and adopted by these groups. So in Dewsbury earlier this month, there was a demonstration between counter-protest groups and a far-right fascist groups, whereby over 7 arrests were made. And I'm just going to ask you, how are you going to go about tackling hate crimes that subject minority ethnic groups, because obviously it's such a heightened political time as it is. And over this time since the referendum, there has been a 42% increase in hate crimes. So I'm saying to you, as a representative for Huddersfield, how are you going to go about addressing that in Parliament for now and post-Brexit?
We do what is important, not just to do it in Parliament. We're very active in Parliament and we're aware of what's happening. And of course, worldwide, we've seen this ghastly shift to the nationalist populist right. Everywhere you look, whether it's President Modi in India, whether it's this ghastly new Prime Minister in Hungary, right across if it's the awful Donald Trump, wherever you look, you can see this. And our own Boris Johnson, the populist right is on an upward surge. And in an interesting way, we don't hear so much about the far-right groups in this country because I think many of them have merged in to mainstream politics. I noticed this the other day when there was a big Brexit demonstration in Parliament Square. And I looked at some of the people, hanging around, chanting outside the pubs and so on. They're the old BNP. I recognise them. They're the very same people. Now, you don't hear much of the BNP because they, I think, have been absorbed into other groups. So, and we've got to be on we've done very well in Huddersfield. We've had organisations locally to fight extremism, to bring a coalition together, to identify it, to be aware when people threaten to come here and demonstrate, the Tommy Robinsons and all that awful bunch. We haven't got to take anything for granted. We've got to renew. They're cleverer. You know, they're acting a different way. They are using all sorts of techniques to try and to cause dissension and disunity in our community. Yeah. We have got to be one step ahead of them. So rebuilding those partnerships that we had in the past are very important. And people like me in Parliament, making sure that everyone's aware, both in government but also across Parliament, that sharing experience between different towns, different communities. And I think what we gathered from my friends and colleagues in the Midlands, for example, big surge in unacceptable behaviour. You're quite right. Since that whole Brexit vote, we have seen many more incidents of really disgraceful and disgusting attitudes and actions against people from minority cultures.
So obviously yourself, you are very active on Twitter. Twitter is obviously a public forum. Anyone can say what they want, and to an extent that is quite problematic. So do you think that social media has changed the way that politicians affirm their agenda and create a sort of following and belief base?
I think so. There are some real strengths and some weaknesses. When I was a much younger MP, my main method of communication were the local papers. I have more followers on Twitter than the Examiner sells copies. And so I have to live with the reality that a modern politician has to use social media to communicate with his constituents. And I try to do that in all the forms of social media that I can. I do all my own tweeting, I have my own focus. I tend to tweet early morning and in that first 4 hours of the day. And I tweet a little bit later, but mainly that's my time. The opening of the day when I've got the time to think about it. The rest of the day I'm busy in Parliament. But I think it's very valuable. But what I do notice is that where people used to write to me in, written in green ink and underlined and all that sort of stuff, now people think because they are anonymous, they can say anything they like, and they say horrid things, they say rude things, they say menacing things, and by and large, I have to live with that. I try to be polite on social media. But if people go beyond the pale, and some do, I've had 2 or 3 death threats recently, and I always make sure, and we have to, as members of Parliament, report death threats and those kinds of threats. And remember, we are next door to the constituency of my great friend Joe Cox. Everything is taken seriously. And some people get pretty much a shock, when the police knock on the door of a couple of days later and say, why did you send that picture of a noose to Barry Sheerman?
And if anything, it's just more demanding and easier to access politicians. So on that note, I've got a few questions that people have sent in from Twitter, Facebook, and they'd just like to know a little bit from you, just in regards to questions. So one anonymous user on Twitter asked, how does Barry feel he is generally perceived amongst his constituents, and how confident would he be of re-election in the likely event of a general election?
Well, I have a very good relationship. I've been around in Huddersfield a long time. I have, if you sort of cut me open, I think Huddersfield goes right through me like a stick of rock. And my whole obsession is making sure that Huddersfield is a prosperous and successful town which is a good place to live, to work and to bring up a family. So, and as I walk around the streets and I go into shops and I talk to people at the bus stop, I get a very positive reaction, and I get a very positive reaction when I communicate on issues on social media. And I really enjoy that, and it's lovely having that estimation. I've held the Huddersfield seat in the hardest times of the Labour Party and the best times for the Labour Party, and we will fight this constituency very hard in the coming election, and I'm sure that my 12,000 majority will be even better.
And another user on Facebook has said, what are your thoughts of a potential general election in December, and what do you think of a 10-year plan for Huddersfield's blueprint?
As you may know, I've always, since I've been here, had a long-term plan for Huddersfield which we renew every few years. That is why we developed the Polytechnic into a university, why I obtained the land from ICI to build a new stadium. That's why I got Alistair Darling to give us the money for the new Kirklees College. That is why we managed to get Tesco to stop building their store and get a new leisure centre for nothing. So all those things that we did in partnership have been looking at the future. And at the moment, we have got a new future. We have got to look at how we make this town in this country more sustainable. You know, the big threat to us is climate change and global warming. And we now have a new group in Huddersfield saying, how do we become the most sustainable town in the world? Yep. How good are we now? Where are the best? How do we meet that? We launched it last week. That is the future.
And on that note, Barry Sheerman, thank you very much for joining us in the studio at KLTV today.
Thank you.
And to you, the audience, what are your current feelings on Brexit? Tweet us at Kirklees Local TV to share your thoughts.